Today I will be speaking with you about the Albuquerque Police Department's policy and procedures regarding the enforcement of New Mexico State Statute 43-1-10 and certificates for evaluation. Under the New Mexico State Statute 43-1-10, police are granted authority to detain and transport a person without a court order to a hospital for an emergency mental health evaluation if any of the following criteria are met. That person is under arrest. The officer suspects that person just attempted suicide. The officer suspects that due to a suspected mental disorder, that person presents a threat of serious harm to themselves or others, or a certificate for evaluation has been issued for that person. This is a summary, and I encourage everyone to research the statute and read it in its entirety. A certificate for evaluation can be issued by a physician, a psychologist, or a qualified mental health professional licensed for independent practice who is affiliated with a community mental health center or core service agency, and allows officers to enforce New Mexico State Statute 43-1-10 without further investigation. When a certificate for evaluation is issued, the author must contact the police department through the 911 emergency dispatch, at which point the author will be instructed to send the certificates to the department either by email to apdc4e@cabq.gov or by fax to a number provided by the dispatcher. APD dispatch will then generate a call for service in the relevant area command. This is an example form for a certificate for evaluation. The certificate should include relevant information such as the name of the patient, the believed location of the patient's behaviors that led to the need for the certificate, and any other known information related to violent behaviors, possession of weapons, or other safety concerns. The more detailed information that can be provided, the more effective the police response can be in serving the certificate as safely as possible. This form must also include the desired hospital destination for the patient, the author's signature with the date and time listed, and contact information for the author. It is important to note the Albuquerque Police Department considers these certificates valid for 72 hours. If a certificate goes unserved longer than that, it must be reissued. Once officers are dispatched to serve the certificate, they are mandated by department policy to attempt to contact the author of the certificate by telephone to verify the information on the certificate and gather any additional information not already listed. It is important to provide accurate telephone numbers for officers to reach the author of the certificate, including alternate phone numbers such as an after-hours line or cell phone. If the officers are unsuccessful in contacting the author, they are still mandated by department policy to attempt to serve the certificate. If service of the certificate is unsuccessful, another service attempt will be scheduled through the APD dispatch for the next shift. Department policy requires APD dispatch to generate calls to serve certificates between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. If a request for service of a certificate is made after 10 p.m., an on-duty supervisor will assess the circumstances of the request and determine if it needs to be served after hours. If the decision is made to not attempt service after hours, APD dispatch will reschedule service of the certificate on the following day after 6 a.m. When the decision has been made to enforce New Mexico State Statute 43-1-10, the person being transported is considered detained and is placed into police protective custody. This is important for authors of certificates for evaluation to understand, as force might be used on a patient if they resist being taken into custody by police during the service of the certificate. The APD standard operating procedures require that handcuff restraints be used at the low back of any person detained and transported in a police vehicle. This includes the transport of people detained under New Mexico State Statute 43-1-10. This means that when a person is brought to a hospital by law enforcement in service of New Mexico State Statute 43-1-10, including the service of a certificate for evaluation, that person is considered detained in police custody and will very likely be transported and brought into the hospital in handcuff restraints behind their back. Due to the nature of a transport under this statute, which involves a risk to the person's self and/or others, restraints are used to provide increased safety and security for the person and the transporting officer. Special circumstances may exist where an officer might exercise discretion in handcuffing, but these situations will be an exception and are not the standard procedure. In certain situations, such as when a person is a juvenile 12 years of age or younger, or if the person voluntarily requests an alternative to a police vehicle, the Albuquerque Community Safety Department can be requested for transport in a non-police vehicle. This requires the person to be calm, cooperative, and deemed safe by Albuquerque community safety personnel. It is important to note that state law specifies a peace officer may detain and transport under New Mexico State Statute 43-1-10. This places the burden of enforcement for this statute on police only, and the Albuquerque Community Safety Department is not required to provide transport. Emergency medical services and the Albuquerque Fire and Rescue Department can assist with transport to a hospital by ambulance when the person is also experiencing a physical medical emergency, such as when they've attempted suicide by overdose, or when there is an existing medical condition that makes transport in a police vehicle unsafe or infeasible, such as a person who is wheelchair dependent. In either situation, police will still follow the transported person to the hospital to assist with the handoff to hospital staff. In many situations, the officer will attempt to preemptively call the hospital emergency room department where the person is being transported to advise of the incoming patient. Upon arrival at a hospital emergency room, the officer will notify the emergency room check-in attendant of the reason for their transport and will remain with the patient until they are received into emergency room triage. During check-in, the patient may be uncooperative due to the transport being involuntary. In this situation, information should be obtained from the transporting officer. The officer will remain with the patient until they have given either verbal or written report of their encounter with the patient to a physician or a physician's designee, and when hospital staff advises the officer they feel safe to take over responsibility for the patient. Once the patient is in the custody of the hospital, the officer will no longer assist with detention or restraint of the patient unless exigent circumstances arise. The APD Standard Operating Procedures and New Mexico State statutes are publicly available for review, and I recommend any who are interested to read the full versions of any mentioned standard operating procedures or statutes. Thank you for your time and your attention.